Okay. Thank you very much for joining, and welcome to the Greek House on my behalf, if this is your first session. I'm joined by a great panel. We've been discussing this topic for a few months, and very honored to moderate this panel with some people I know well, some people I don't know so well, and some people I've been following on LinkedIn for years. So it's really great to exchange ideas with you. My name is Camhis. I run a private equity advisory firm called FOSS in Geneva, and I'll just present the panelists very quickly before they introduce themselves in more detail. Next to me is Anne Mettler from Breakthrough Energy, Irina Gorbounova from ArcelorMittal, Andrea Bombardi from RINA, and Aikaterini Lianoudaki from ProEuropean. Our topic today is the role of green hydrogen in the energy transition, and this will be our focus. But I think it's interesting, coming to the end of Davos, to see some of the ideas and also conclusions that may come out of this week after what I'm sure has been a marathon of meetings and panels and presentations. I'll give the floor to my panelists, and if you'd like to start with just a brief introduction of your role and what you do in Breakthrough Energy before we go into some of the more detailed topics.
Yes, so thank you for the very kind introduction. First, I have to say, and this you may not know this about me, but I actually lived in Greece for 2 years, many years ago in Athens. So I will always have a soft spot for Greece. It's a wonderful country and wonderful people as well, of course. So green hydrogen. So the first thing the thing you didn't mention, yes, I'm with Breakthrough Energy. For those of you that don't know Breakthrough, it was founded in 2015 by Bill Gates. It's essentially an organization that has as its mission to stand up a new generation of clean technologies, including green hydrogen. And but my own background is in public policy. I used to be a Director General at the European Commission. So I'm coming at this very much from the perspective of Europe, from the perspective of public policy, but also from my current role, where I'm trying to stand up green hydrogen and have been doing so for quite a few years now, if I can say so. Europe made a big bet on green hydrogen early on. And to the extent that Europe focused at all on any emerging clean technology, it was green hydrogen. So for Europe's own credibility and Europe's own climate targets and energy security, it is of fundamental importance that we now deliver. I have to say, and this is maybe sometimes when it's difficult to be the first one because maybe others are more bullish, but I am disappointed about the progress so far. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of announcements. But if I look at what has actually the projects that have been announced that have reached final investment decision, last count, 7%. So there is a huge gap in the ambition, in the announcements, and in what is actually happening. Because let's face it, it's only when you have final investment decision that the shovel hits the ground. This is when you're actually feeling something, right? And that's then only about the projects. Interestingly, I'm just coming from a session in the metaverse, and I hope I don't have a red forehead because I had to have this thing on me. But it was essentially about the net zero 2050 vision, and it was actually, I have to say, a very visual, a very interesting visual experience, if I can say so, because what you see there is the integral importance of hydrogen, but also that you need to transport hydrogen, right? So everything is connected with everything, and at the end of the day, and this is, I don't want to speak too long, but what I realized in hydrogen, and as someone who in my previous job at the European Commission got the European Battery Alliance underway. Hydrogen is more complicated than batteries because what you're talking about is essentially system change. You're talking about a new technology. You're talking about a value chain. You need to build up an electrolyzer industry. You need to think about the underpinning infrastructure. So there is a lot that needs to fall into place. And I'm not speaking here about the investment that is needed. And then the difficulty of scaling. So we're talking about systemic change. And that is really difficult to do. And especially in an EU of 27 countries, you know, with different interests, with different financing modalities, you know, not connected to one another. It was interesting, and I'll conclude on that, but we had an interesting meeting here about it was actually about hydrogen and the difficulty of getting, because Spain is uniquely, and I would say the same about Greece, uniquely positioned to produce green hydrogen, but it cannot transport it to Central Europe. I mean, up to Central Europe, where it would be needed, like places like Germany, because what I was told, France is making a big bet on pink hydrogen, right? So because they want to use their nuclear power. So there's a lot of politics. You want to learn about the politics, you know, of energy, really complicated. Just look at what's happening in hydrogen. So what you're talking here is extremely important. And thank you for inviting me and convening the session.
Thank you. And we will come back to you also about your views about versus the US, what's happening in Europe and China, yeah, which I know you've written a lot about. Yeah. Irina, please.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you Greek House for inviting me to speak. I think it's such an important subject to address, and I hope you all enjoy in Davos. It's really a marathon. I'm losing my voice on the fourth day, so please bear with me. But so I represent steel industry. I'm with ArcelorMittal, and this is really the company that's trying to be at the forefront of decarbonization of the steel industry. And maybe just I want to set the stage for the industry. I don't know how many of you know, but steel accounts for just below 10% of CO2 emissions. And as such, represents a great opportunity for us to make a difference and really to decarbonize and make an impact in decarbonization area. And the issue or the challenge is that the way steel is traditionally produced is through the blast furnace using coke and coal. And this is where the issue starts, because that results in the CO2 emissions. But other than that, steel is actually a very versatile and very sustainable material. It's infinitely recyclable. It's something that we need a lot of. We need it for the energy transition. You need it for the solar panels, wind towers, green infrastructure, electrical vehicles, just name it. You really need steel everywhere. So the challenge is really how do we get it to the low carbon and zero carbon steel, and that's what we're trying to achieve in our group. We've pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050. We have a number of fundamental pathways how we're going to do it, and one of them is DRI based on green hydrogen, or hydrogen again. I think, you know, we can speak about the whole rainbow of colors, but I think it's definitely hydrogen will play a significant role. But just to echo what Anne said, the challenge is the economics, and to get it to scale. Everyone's saying, you know, how do you get from seed to scale? To get it to scale, you need to make economics work, and where it is now, it's really you have this gap between where it needs to be and where it is now. So it's what Bill Gates calls green premium. How do we address it? How do we bridge this gap? And it's actually very significant. So I can echo Anne's disappointment about, you know, scaling the green hydrogen, but then how can you now? Because if you look at the case, how can you make you know, the business case, how can you invest billions? And it's really, we're talking about billions or trillions that required to build the whole green hydrogen economy. So how do you invest in something where, you know, you don't see this return? So I think this is something that needs to be addressed, and it's very critical. So of course there are a number of other pathways how we're going to decarbonize steelmaking. One of them is direct electrolysis. So for instance, we invested through the funds, we invested in a company called Boston Metal. which is pioneering a molten oxide electrolysis of iron ore, which offers, and also knows the company because Breakthrough Energy Venture is also a co-investor in the company. And this is something that also presents as a great opportunity to decarbonize. But going back, I know that green hydrogen is the subject of this panel. I think that the challenge is there. How can we, some of our facilities are actually green hydrogen ready, but it's really the infrastructure. How do we get this infrastructure there? And I hope, I know my fellow panelists will have an interesting view on that, so I look forward to listening to your perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, with your introductions, and please don't address all my future questions in your introductory comments. I'll be out of a job.
So good afternoon, everybody. Andrea Bombardi from RINA. RINA is an Italian company doing consulting engineering activities, testing, inspection, certification. We are present in 17 countries, so we are looking what is happening also for hydrogen, and I take care about decarbonization at global level. I just took a positive flavor on hydrogen. Otherwise, today we put under the ground hydrogen. Oh, I'd like to say that hydrogen today is feedstock. Okay, so today only 0.1% of hydrogen is produced green. Okay, or low carbon. You can. This means that we have room. And we need green hydrogen for this. Then hydrogen is much more because you have some project that some process that you cannot electrify, and you need to understand how to address the decarbonization of these processes. And you have some other application like heavy transport, where today batteries are not going well in terms of performance, in terms of weight, and so you need to find someone else. Okay, could be hydrogen, could be biofuels in the future, synthetic fuels, but hydrogen is in the frame. So my point is when we need to address a lot of things related to the scale-up of technologies, the capacity, okay, of a technology, because today, if you want to address the European target, we don't have the capacity of the electrolysis. So if you want 10 million tons domestic production, 10 million tons imported, we don't have so many electrolyzers to address this production. We have a lot of things to do. Transport is another issue. You can have ammonia to transport hydrogen. Ammonia is a one-century industry, so you can rely on it. But then you need technology to crack down hydrogen from ammonia. If you need poor hydrogen. If you need fertilizer, use ammonia, and this is green ammonia if it's come from green hydrogen. So there is the room, and I think that we have to start with the existing picture and just starting substituting what today is black, gray, or blue with green. And this is an asset. Paradoxically, also fossil fuel could have a less carbon footprint if you use green hydrogen to produce them. Mm-hmm. Because hydrogen is a feedstock for the refineries. So if you decrease the carbon footprint of hydrogen, you have in your car a diesel or gasoline that has less carbon footprint.
Exactly a year ago, in the panel I moderated, it was mainly oil and gas, but with a transition, let's say, orientation. And I think, already from the first 5 minutes, we see that there is a transition. This is not a black and white or an overnight change, especially if we're in such an early stage of adoption. Katerina, please introduce yourself. And
I am Aikaterini Lianoudaki. Thank you for inviting us. We are ProEuropean Trading GmbH, a German-based company. We have experience also in green hydrogen. And now we are installing the H2 Crete Valley project in Greece, in Crete, of 100 megawatt electrolyzer. And we would like also to discuss the points that you mentioned from the investment decision making, and of course the help that we need from all all the tools that can provide additional help, such innovation fund or other investment vehicles that can assist us in order to promote our projects. And of course, the difficulties that we have by setting up the value chain of the hydrogen, the production of renewable hydrogen in one area, and how we can have off-takers and how we can do the distribution and the transportation of hydrogen, and of course the pipelines that are needed and the infrastructure needed in countries so that we can continue with our investment decisions and the implementation of such projects.
Thank you. And Anne, I'd like to go back to that 7% figure you mentioned, which is shocking, given the policy push. And I don't know, how far back, let's say, you go to get to that 7%. You start from the latest policy announcement or sort of a general view. But I think, my main question to all of you is, what policy-making tools are available to push this forward? I mean, is it subsidies? Is it legal framework? Or is just a big systemic change of infrastructure that naturally will not be done by 2030, and it's more of a 2050 project if we're lucky?
Well, what really delayed the investments is regulation, because it took the EU an exceedingly long time to figure out how to define green hydrogen. I'm sure everyone here in the room has heard about the famous Delegated Act on Additionality. So that lost us a lot of time, if I can say so. And in that sense, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was extremely helpful, because that really helped to unblock this delegated act. And it led to what I like to call a sort of a competition to the top, right? Because Europe oftentimes is actually ahead in sort of the good intention and the announcements and the ambition, but it then actually it was sort of falling asleep at the wheel, if I can say so. And the IRA was an extremely helpful wake-up call. Because it's quite simplistic, if I can say so, and therefore, and no offense to any business in the room, but it really seems to speak to businesses because it's easy to understand. I mean, this is $3 per kilogram. I think everyone, a tax credit, everyone can understand. Someone said to me the other day, in the US, you get a carrot. In Europe, you get a carrot sliced up in 100 pieces, right? So, we need to think more about positive incentives rather than too many punitive measures, if I can say so. There's a lot of confidence in Europe that the ETS, the emission trading system, will just do the job. I am not convinced about that. I also think, broadly speaking, that we don't have a real single market in these emerging clean technologies. So I'll give you an example. One of our portfolio companies is specialized in the transport of green hydrogen in existing pipelines, so that can be used for gas. This is awesome because you can use existing infrastructure to do this, and they blend. They blend the green hydrogen with gas, and then they can put it through the pipelines. So, but listen to this. Every European country has a different regulation with regards to the blending mandate. Duh. How is this supposed to work if you're actually transporting this hydrogen? So that's where I'm saying to my former colleagues at the European Commission, wake up. This doesn't fall from the sky. People are going to have to transport this. You can't have a different blending mandate in every single geography. This can't work, So we really need policy planning, systemic thinking, and we need to understand we're not the first ones who are thinking about green hydrogen. The whole world has woken up to this, not just the Americans. Look at Neom here on the street, how big this is, right? So everyone's in this game, the Chinese, the Australians, right? So wake up, Europe. This is really 5 minutes to midnight for us to finally get serious about this.
Andrea and Irina, due to the structure of your companies, you have global exposure to how different country regulations and adoption, let's say, policies. Katerina was telling me earlier that some European countries do not even have a policy framework yet. I think, two are still in that list. But Andrea, from your perspective, how that issue of standardization and different country policies, maybe we could stick to Europe, not to make it too big. How does that affect your work? Because I know you consult to projects around Europe.
I come back to the point of the targets, okay? So Europe recognizes that we have to import hydrogen, and we have to recognize this hydrogen as we want as Europe. But this is something that is not for market. This is a global market. At the end of the day, we have to treat hydrogen as a global commodity, like we do with Brent or WTI. And if we have additionality in Europe, in Brazil, additionality could be in a different way, could be monthly, could be daily, weekly. And so how you compare the green of Brazil when you import from Brazil ammonia with the green that we all like in Europe? But it's not a market. Yeah. It's something that creates blocks, but if it declare to import hydrogen, we cannot create barriers for the importation of hydrogen. So we need global standards for hydrogen. This is the truth. We cannot think that we have our domestic production and when we import hydrogen, we have different rules. We have to have the same rules all over the world, like we had with the brand WTE. It's in that case is a price. Here is how to describe the low carbon intensity of hydrogen, and it should be applicable to all the countries. So from my point of view, we need to create a global standards. This is the key in order to, let me say, enabler for the market. Okay, it's not the only one, but it's important.
And that standardization, Irina, I have a question to you. Which I mean, you invested in Boston Metal. The product that will come out of Boston Metal and your XCarb product. I mean, do they have a carbon certificate, or do they compare to each other? And I'm going back to what Andrea was saying. How do you?
And I mean, it's a good point, because maybe just if everyone's talking about rainbow of hydrogen, and I think we should move away from the colors and really talk about carbon intensity, because there is a place for a number of colors, but it's really like I do think that pink hydrogen based on nuclear has a role to play. So we're also looking, for instance, at the gold hydrogen, which is the geological hydrogen, still very early stages, but potentially offers. And I thought, Marcus, you and me talked about Kaloma and some other companies that really now focused on gold hydrogen, on geological hydrogen. This potentially, you have reservoir of trapped hydrogen in the ground that you can really, get out. So, we shouldn't be just talking about green. And what I'm trying to say is not about colors, it's about carbon intensity. And I think we need to ensure that we, depending on the region, we really use and utilize and ensure that we get the most beneficial way of how we can get hydrogen and bring it to the industry. And the point you were also making about feedstock, for us, it's not just about energy, it's also a reducing agent for iron ore. So this is actually the role that hydrogen will play in the industry. It's not, I mean, we need a lot of renewable energy, but hydrogen for us is to use iron ore, and instead of coking coal or instead of natural gas, use hydrogen in order to get the carbon footprint of steel making to the absolute minimum.
Understood. And going back to Katerina, looking at the greenfield project in Crete, in Greece, are you looking at the whole, let's say, range from energy production to green hydrogen production, or only at the final stage, using, let's say, renewable energy that is produced by others?
Yes, we are using renewable energy that is produced by other people inside the Crete island, because we have all the countries in Europe, especially Spain, Italy, and Greece, has the ability to produce a lot of energy, especially in Crete. Solar energy and wind energy is one of the advantages that we should take under consideration when we are thinking about the implementation of the projects. So we can use this energy to produce green hydrogen, as this is our target in our the scope of our concept and the implementation of our project, because it's important to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And it's just a number to mention from Crete. 70% of the energy needs of the islands are coming from heavy oil, and this is impossible for an island that he has almost whole year solar energy. So this is something that you should take under consideration. This should be a green island, totally from renewables, and totally can contribute in the targets of the European Union for the hydrogen production. And also it's very important to mention that Crete has a strategical position. It's the entrance points for all the pipelines. Let's say for EastMed, it's coming from Israel, then Cyprus, then Crete, and then goes mainland Greece and continues. Also, the Eurasia interconnector is passing again from Crete, the Greece-Africa interconnector. So it's so many pipelines that can connect Crete and bring energy, cheap energy from Africa, for example, or natural gas from Israel, and these pipelines can be also mixed with hydrogen. So we have a path to contribute to the European targets, and we have to help the sustainability of Europe. We need to have a production inside Europe.
Thank you. I think we've spoken a bit about production. Storage is another issue. Distribution seems to be, especially because Europe needs to import as well as produce, distribution seems to be a big challenge. Andrea, you mentioned earlier some of the projects you've been looking at. I mean, how do we build the networks to make sure the production, when it comes, goes where it should be, and the import facilities are properly constructed?
Yes, and I think that also, as Katerina said, the Med Sea has a strategic location because it's connected to Africa, to the Middle East, even if now it's suffering a geopolitical situation. But these are countries where the energy can come to Europe. We can have the opportunity to have a blend, as Anne said, but today Europe is also hungry for gas. So when we put hydrogen in a pipeline, we reduce the energy density that we transport, because the volumetric density, energy density of hydrogen is 1/4 of the one of methane. So right now, I think that we have to think also to dedicate infrastructure, and this is what we studied. We studied a big pipeline, 3,000 kilometers of pipeline from the Gulf area landing to Greece. It was, let me say, a sort of white paper study. And we face that the transport cost is around €1 per kilo, and you can have a levelized cost of hydrogen delivered that is €2.7 kilo in 2030 and 2.3 2050. Also, considering the decrease of the cost of energy, the decrease of the cost of electrolyzer, and so on. So it's feasible. You can face the technical challenges, but you need time, because if you want to do an offshore pipeline to that, you need almost decades, something like that. Also, you need to convince the finance investors and just to receive any funding, because it's a strategic network. It's not, let me say, something that can be delivered from a private investor. It's something that has to be recognized for different countries, and so it's an international project. So it's feasible, but we are in delay because this is our study was 2.5 million tons, so 1/4 of a target 2030. And there are no projects right now like that related to the production of low carbon hydrogen. So in any case, we need to set up infrastructure. If you are far away, you can use the ship of ammonia. and you can import ammonia, but you don't have a continuous flow. If you have a pipeline and you have the off-takers close to the pipeline, you have a continuous flow. If we are speaking about steel industry, they work 24 hours per day. They don't work when there is the sun or the wind. So we need to create this continuous flow for hydrogen, because they need hydrogen every time they need for production.
Any other comments from the rest of the panel on networks and pipelines?
Yeah, I wanted to come back to the point that you made about global standards, because this is really important. And I know that COP28, as they were preparing, they were looking at this issue. And I think the fact that it didn't come out of COP28 shows you how difficult this is. However, what I will say is the Europeans took a long time with their delegated act. What was interesting is when the IRA was launched, the US went through something quite similar, where it became very sensitive, this issue of additionality. So they ended up adopting something that is very similar to our delegated act. And the point that I'm making is that in addition to thinking about a European market, maybe we should think about a transatlantic market. I have been advocating what I call the green transatlantic marketplace, not to the exclusion of others, but it will be more realistic and easy to integrate hydrogen standards across two geographies that are already completely intertwined. Every large American company has huge operations in Europe and vice versa. And so this is something that I am advocating very much, at least as a first step, because a global standard for an emerging clean technology is I'm sorry to say, is I think impossible. So let's take sort of these steps. And I think that would help a lot, if we could have that kind of debate. And can I ask you to really try to think about it, to support this, because the demand needs to come from people like you here in the room to say, look, Europe itself is nice, but we can think even bigger. And especially, I'm looking at you as well, Irina, because you have operations also across the Atlantic. Because we don't have time to sort this all out, right? I mean, so the more we can integrate, the more we can have joint standards, regulations where we have mutual recognition, the more we can think all of this through, the faster we can deploy. And this is really critical, because otherwise, I can see, especially in the democracies, we get very distracted, So it's, I always used to say green hydrogen was sort of the flavor of the day a few years ago, but it's already lost a lot of momentum because people are starting to understand just how difficult, how expensive this is.
But
just maybe one more
ahead.
comment, also what Andrea was saying. I think it's a long game. We all understand it's a long game, but we need to start now. We can't wait. I think we know that it's going to take a long time. It's very capital intensive, and it's going to take a long time to get the infrastructure in place. But again, the issue is, you need to look at the whole value chain. You need to get the standards in place. You need to look at technologies. One thing I'm really, really focused on is innovation. I do believe that we need to look at some of these game-changing technologies and try to support them. But again, in order to get things to scale, you need to have the standards. You need to have a favorable regulatory framework. And this is something that I think has been holding the infrastructure development and really deploying of those technologies for a long time. We need to get it started. And that's the reason this is so paramountly important to have it sorted.
In terms of adoption, there are certain industries that are, let's say, further ahead, others that are very much behind. What are your views? Andrea, maybe you have a view on this, or also from your side, especially on the steel industry. What do you think is the adoption curve in terms of different industries? There's a lot of talk about shipping also. Do you have a view of maybe which industry could be, the tipping industry to push for adoption even further?
Again, I can talk about, of course, everyone's talking about mobility and electrical vehicles, saying, okay, maybe hydrogen will not play such a huge role there yet. But for the industry like ours, it's going to be important. But also, I think we shouldn't aim for perfection. We need to start moving. So for that reason, for instance, again, if you look at the technologies, we have DRI, so direct reduced iron, based on green hydrogen is one of the pathways. And actually, you already have DRI facilities globally, but they use natural gas. So instead of just, building all the greenfield facilities and trying to create everything, you can use some of those existing facilities, and you can try to blend hydrogen with natural gas, with the eventual idea to phase it out and switch to complete green hydrogen. But all I'm trying to say, it's a transition, right? We shouldn't just drop everything and start building all the new facilities, because first of all, it's also not very sustainable. So you need to look at how can you make this transition sustainable. But you need to really make those concrete steps in order to get the evolution required.
Thank you. And again, this naturally leads us to the question, who pays and where does the money come from? Because as you both said, as you all said, these are huge projects. We're talking about billions, maybe trillions of investment. And the availability of funding and the speed of funding makes a huge difference. I think across the panel we have different sides of the equation. Katerina has a brand new project, and it would be interesting to hear your experience of trying to get funding for a completely greenfield project. But also, Andrea, I'm sure your company plays a role in securing that funding for your clients. And then, obviously you guys allocate as investors, both of you, to new projects, maybe more on the technology side rather than the final production. So who pays? And I'm sure you can all have a comment on that.
In order for a project to be, let's say, optimal and interesting for some investor in hydrogen, it's quite difficult, because we cannot have an accurate estimation of the profits and the coming years. Also, it's very hard to discuss about the off-takers and the potential agreements. It's not a project that you can say, yes, I'm building this hotel, and then in 1 year I will have these revenues and these profits, and then someone can see what is coming up as his investment. And that hydrogen is totally different. The targets are different. We check that we need to change the climate and we need to support the CO2 emissions avoidance. So in this scale, we need the support of grants and subsidies. It's not only the investor that is going to say, yes, I'm going through this project, but also we need additional grants so that to de-risk the project or to find the proper off-takers, because for our project, off-takers is a huge discussion, because we have potential off-takers and big ones like the ports, like the airports, but they don't know how they can adapt the technology and how they can use hydrogen in their current infrastructure, or what type of investment they need additionally to be done from one off-taker in order to have hydrogen as a clean fuel for his company. So the first one for the hydrogen economy is knowledge sharing. We need to inform all the industry, not only the hard to adapt industry, but also other industries about what hydrogen can offer them, and also to advise them how they can change the infrastructure in order to become potentially off-takers for hydrogen. And of course, we need the help, and we have the European Union now, he has the Innovation Fund, he has Horizon calls that involve renewable hydrogen. We have the Clean Hydrogen Partnership, also a call for application. So there are tools that can help us, but also the most important is the knowledge sharing across all the economy and the usage and the potential help of hydrogen in the decarbonization.
Just the complexity that you described for one project, I think might answer your initial point. But is bank funding in its, let's say, bank and infrastructure funding available to projects like this?
For a bank, it's always the banking criteria that you need to have the off-taker in place, you need to have the infrastructure in place, you need to have partners, sponsor in place. So you must be at the end of your journey in order for a bank to come and invest to you.
Okay, understood. Andrea, sorry, on your side.
Yes, from your side, from the European Union, since this has been a political decision in order to face different economies in the world, there are a lot of money related to hydrogen that is mainly covering CapEx. And what has been done from Next Generation EU is to put this money mainly on use of hydrogen and the innovation of technologies, not on the production of hydrogen. Okay, so the technology clearly are an enabler for the production, because if you have a better electrolyzer, you can have better efficiency in the production. What is not on the table is OPEX. Okay, because when you run the plant, then you have your operative cost, and the cost of hydrogen are mainly related to electrical energy from one side and the operation of the electrolyzer. So some of the member states are just applying for a stimulus package also on OPEX. In some case, like Innovation Fund, you can have also one part for OPEX. For sure, this is not enough. Mm-hmm. It's not enough to convince some sectors. Yeah. Okay, some other sectors, let me say, could be easily addressed. Okay, because if you compare the cost of hydrogen in a car to the gasoline that you put in the car, it's a different market that if we want to sell hydrogen to the steel industry, okay, they are going to pay less, okay? But this is a subsector. And also you need, let me say, short logistics, for example, okay? We spoke about shipping. If you want to use hydrogen shipping, you need a ferry. From A to B to A. If you have a merchant ship going all over the world, you need to have a bunker in each port. This is not what you can do today, okay? And also for the energy density, you can have hydrogen as for the propulsion. So each sector is a niche market where you can find different initiatives. I make another example. In Italy, the most advanced project is railway, so a train fed by hydrogen. But it's climbing up, so no batteries. There are tunnels, so no infrastructure. If you should have done the infrastructure, you should have changed the route with a different environmental impact. So this project is, let me say, fit for hydrogen application. So you have tried to select and try also to create a scale project. Okay, sometimes you need a big pilot in order to develop then all the connected initiatives. And this is another key, okay, just involving all the parts and creating an ecosystem from producer to off-taker. Yeah. So join the dots, otherwise if you produce but you don't have off-takers, the project is not done in the proper way.
Clearly. Irina, I have the impression that large industrial facilities can, let's say, spur or attract investment, maybe also by governments. I think you or other companies may have such projects in Europe where the decarbonization effect can be a big magnet for additional funding. Do you agree? Do you see that happening?
Maybe I'll first talk about, you were saying who's going to pay. And from our perspective, something that I'm quite passionate about, we've launched XCarb Innovation Fund to invest in the ecosystem, like you said, because we need to look at the whole value chain. Regardless of the technology pathway that we take to decarbonize steelmaking, we need a lot of clean energy. For that reason, we invested in a renewable energy startup. We invested in TerraPower again for the point, the point you were making. We need base load energy. We can't just operate when the sun shines and the wind blows. For that reason, I think nuclear will have to play a significant role. We invested in a long duration energy storage startup startup called Foam Energy, and they're developing exactly that. They're developing a technology which is going to be low cost but long duration to store renewable energy to ensure that we have a 24/7 around the clock supply of energy. We invested in hydrogen startup called H2 Pro, which is also developing a very novel technology how you can produce hydrogen without using membrane, so that can potentially reduce the cost significantly. We invested in Boston Metal, so we invested in Lanzatech. So we are looking across the whole value chain. We made a number of investments, but of course, to your point, much more is required. So also actually we invested in Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. So that's a platform launched by Breakthrough Energy to address exactly this issue of the chicken and egg, that you can't get the projects to start until they're bankable, and you can't get them to the bankable stage unless you scale them. So I think Catalyst is trying to address exactly that, to support those emerging technologies. And we made a number of investments now with the Catalyst, not in hydrogen yet, right? And I think, again, that kind of brings me to the point, how do you make this case? And I do hope that with Catalyst program, we can find some of those promising hydrogen projects that we can support through the Catalyst program, that can really take off and get to the scale required. So that's to the point of who is going to pay. So there are initiatives out there, but of course much more is required to get it moving.
Can I just say the policymaker needs to understand that all of these targets in 2030, 2050, this doesn't fall from the sky. So what the European Green Deal needs is really a business case. The bottom line is, not just for green hydrogen, but any clean technology, if you cannot make money with it, it's never going to take off, right? So, I mean, this is really the ultimate conundrum that we are facing, is they are competing with fossil energy, and, the infrastructure is in place, it's still comparatively cheap. So this is, in clean energy, or in clean technologies, really the thing that matters is deployment at scale and cost. And this is what the policymaker needs to wrap their mind around. And they need to understand there isn't enough public money out there to do this. So they need to find new ways of working with the private sector, of working with investors. And this is difficult. Irina just mentioned Catalyst, where we work together. This is really a learning curve, right? Because this is about first-of-a-kind projects that are trying to overcome this thing, saying if we just start it, we get the project going, the technology will be on a learning curve. It's not going to be perfect from day one, but we're going to learn and we're going to scale up. And when we scale up, we reduce the cost. We're going to have more projects, right? So this is what Breakthrough Energy Catalyst is. It's a blended finance model. Let me say, in Europe, we have a partnership with the European Commission, with the European Investment Bank, and I think it should be studied as a best practice, because, this also requires from policymakers a completely different perspective on these things. This is much harder to do than just to write a paper where you put in nice targets, right? So this is exceedingly complicated. So I'm saying, who pays? We need blended finance model. Let me say, because also I work for Bill Gates, I think philanthropy can play a role here as well. There's a lot of money in the climate space. It's not very operational, right? So, let's get some philanthropic capital in there, because it can really make the difference that can make a project bankable or not, right? So let's really look at private sector, public sector, philanthropy. Let's look also at carbon contracts for difference. Let's look at public guarantees. There's a lot we can do here that we are currently not sufficiently exploiting, right? The bottom line is we need to massively de-risk, because this is still risky. This is exactly what you're saying. You go to your bank, well, who's going to buy that stuff, right? And how are you going to transport it? And so much of that is not really necessarily even in your domain of influence, right? Infrastructure is not the responsibility of a company, right? Or a startup. So this is why I'm saying systemic thinking, proper policy planning. And here we need to look at China. I'm sorry, China is the only place that has really managed to do, what I just said, scale up and reduce the cost of solar, of wind, of batteries, of electric vehicles. It completely dominates a critical mineral supply chain, including the processing. if they are getting into green hydrogen, and I guarantee you they are, chances are it's going to be commercialized and stood up there. So we need to get smarter. We need to look at the entire innovation cycle. We need to look at how can we deploy the funding that is needed. Because let me tell you, even if in the short term the fossil energy seems cheaper, it's not. This is going to be in the long term, unless we make this transition, will be exceedingly difficult and will put us out of business, frankly.
And just maybe to add, I think there is a lot of willingness, and I've seen, for instance, coming out of COP, there was a big announcement on Altera Fund, which is a 25 billion. I think it's the largest private fund. So there is a 25 billion fund launched at COP that can also leverage, I believe, 125 billion of government money. So there are committed funds. There is, willingness and money to do that, but I can already see the challenge they will face in finding the projects to invest in. And this is where you don't need to multiply those loss-making projects. You need to fix the business case. I think, and you and me discussed this last time in Brussels, you need to fix the case, and then the rest will follow. Because if you know from the start this is a loss-making case, and if you're saying, okay, it's 2.7 by 2030, it's 2.3 by 2050, but for our industry to be at this breakthrough level we are now, we need it to be like below 2. So how can you make it work?
Thank you. I'd like to take a short break because we have a video message from Yorgo Hadjimarkakis. I don't know if that's easy to activate.
Many thanks for having me at this interesting, important debate in Davos. Who wouldn't like to be in Davos? And unfortunately, I cannot be with you today in person. But I have been told that 800 CEOs and, of course, global leaders are gathering there and discussing what are the main topics of today and of the next years. And I'm so happy to be invited in the Greek house in Davos, of course. Super proud to see that Greece is doing so many activities. And thanks to all of you to have me in that discussion. Thanks, Andrea Bombardi from RINA, one of our members, Irina Gorbounova from ArcelorMittal, another important member of Hydrogen Europe, and of course, Katerina Lianoudaki from ProEuropean, super active member and very much involved in everything Crete. And as a Cretan myself, I'm of course very happy to see also this island between Europe, Asia and Africa at the crossroads of cultures and continents to be so actively involved. And I'm also extremely proud to be in one panel here with Mettler, a personality in Brussels that I know for many, many years. I am every time eager to read your posts because they are always full of knowledge, but also clear judgment into which direction to go. And that's what you would expect from me, to give hopefully some assessment, some judgment into why a net zero Europe needs hydrogen. The answer is very simple. Because if we want to go for net zero, we not only need electrons, green electrons, because the renewable production will grow. It grew already over the last years, and despite all the bottlenecks that we see, despite inflation, despite war situations, interruption of supply chains, there will be more renewables, maybe not as fast as some people would hope and wish, but they will be there. And the more renewables you have, the more intermittency you have, the more storage need you will have, because electricity needs or to be consumed immediately or to be stored. And this is the big entry door and entry point for hydrogen. I think when we were discussing after Russia's invasion into Ukraine, the new targets for the Fit for 55 legislation and the European Green Deal, there was quite some optimism in replacing Russian gas much, much, much faster than we now see we can do. But that shouldn't stop us from thinking, what can we do better? Where can we circumvent the problems, the big problems that we see and that we have in the supply chains and also in licensing and finding funding for these big projects. And this is where hydrogen possibly needs to be a little bit more patient, but only a little bit. Because when you see what happened over the last months, especially the big events, Anne and myself, we met also in Dubai at the COP28, where basically humankind decided altogether to go for a tripling of renewables. That's super. A tripling of nuclear energy. Some people don't say it's super, but it's good for climate. But that's a lot of electricity that until 2030 will be in the grids. Not possible, because the grids are not there. We will not be able to ramp up within the next 6 years so many grids. What we can do is we can use existing gas infrastructure that needs to be retrofitted and refurbished in order to make it possible that these green electrons are turned into green molecules and then are transported and also stored via hydrogen. Now, is this the only solution? No, and nobody says that. But in order to bring all the different sectors together, you need the sectoral integration or sector coupling, wrong English, but the word tries to allude to what it is about, to couple sectors to make the energy flow possible from one sector to another. And hydrogen has the ability to go into that direction. Will it be possible to find the right finances? As we see, the world at the moment is struggling with kicking off clean tech industries. And there's a quite big fight who will be first. The Inflation Reduction Act from the US was already highlighting that there is a big player that wants really to integrate high tech or clean tech in the US in order to stay or to become a big player. On the other side, there is China already. They are already in the forefront with certain clean tech, especially batteries and solar. They are leading, so it's very difficult to catch up. And that is where hydrogen steps in, because in terms of hydrogen, the Europeans are still leading. Whatever we hear about Chinese electrolyzers, good, bad, there is already an overcapacity, but there is a ready and steady growth of high-quality European electrolyzers. To give one example, I could give other examples in usage of hydrogen in buses or in trucks, where Europe is really leading. I'm saying all this in order to allude to a very simple fact. We cannot narrow down the scope of hydrogen to just 1 or 2 or 3 parts of the whole economy. Hydrogen will be everywhere, but we need to allow this hydrogen to get there. The Greek example is a quite interesting example, because Greece is a country that not only geographically is at the crossroad, culturally always was, but Greece can be both a producer of renewables and hence also hydrogen, but Greece can also be an important hub. A hub in the sense of being the entry door to the European market for hydrogen that comes from Egypt, or hydrogen that comes from Saudi Arabia, Oman, the Emirates. Why is it so important? Because we can clearly see that in these geographies, especially in the Middle East and Northern Africa, the hydrogen future has begun already. And these economies are eagerly looking for off-takers. And here is where Greece can play a big role with the hub, as a hub, with ports, or with direct consumption, like in Crete, where the power production could move from mazout, from crude oil, from diesel, from mazout oil, to ammonia, green ammonia based on green hydrogen, or to hydrogen as such. But also where the Greek shipping, so the maritime fleet, and Greece has by far the biggest fleet in Europe, with a capacity of 60%, this could be turned into a very, very important instrument to transform our economies that at the moment are based on fossil towards the hydrogen effect. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to highlight these elements. I am really eagerly looking into the outcome of this discussion, and I will come back to you to ask. Be sure that the Greek House will also, over the next years, play a very, very important role when it comes to hydrogen, and not only. Many thanks, Ευχαριστώ πολύ, and best success for this discussion.
Well, I think actually it wasn't planned, the exact timing, but I think it came well after our initial discussion, because we touched upon a lot of these points, and I think he summarized very well some of the challenges. I mean, we could be talking about this for a long time. I would like your concluding comments, and I think each of you can decide whether it's more policy making or sort of business incentives, or let's say financing. I'll let you choose your topic. We have a bit more time for questions, but I think it would be good to get your concluding views about whether 2030, even as a target, should be there, or maybe we should be going even further, and what advice you have to businesses and policymakers.
Go ahead. Well, I will. I'm sorry. Mine is very quite modest because I've been in policy making too long to believe in these targets anymore. So they are good to have, so you know what you're working towards. Something very concrete that I put forward is we need real-time metrics, because this is where I think we've gone wrong. We think we're really ambitious, but if it's not happening, then what's that good for? So I would propose that for policy making, starting immediately, we actually start to measure demand in real time. We start to measure final investment decision. We start to measure the number of projects that are actually happening, not just those that are being announced. So that would be, for me, very operational, because I can tell you that would be a wake-up call for a lot of people, and that can be extremely helpful.
Thank you.
I think from my perspective, and I don't no problem. I don't want to choose one of the topics. I don't want to, because I think it will take a number of things to get there. So I think it's like this net zero jigsaw that we need to put a lot of pieces together to make things happen. So it's the whole systematic, I think, and you mentioned it a couple of times, this systemic or systematic change. We need to really address the whole ecosystem. So it's policy, it's standards, it's technology, it's infrastructure, funding. So it all needs to come together to really make it happen. Obviously, there are concrete things that we need to do in each one of them. But for me, I think my concluding remark is really going to take a lot of, and I know everyone's talking about collaboration, but it will take a lot of collaboration between policymakers, between industries, cross-industry, and we need to do it all together. We can't just, rely or wait for someone to move. So we need to all come to the table and say, okay, it's a systemic change, and that's how we should make this happen.
And from my point of view, I should add that annual review on the target are surely needed, because today we launch the ball to 2030, 2050, but no one knows which are the target, the increasing, or if we have to fill some gaps and we have to change route. And this is the first comment. The second comment is we have to continue investing in technology. Technology is really the heart, because if you have wanted to lower down the price, technology is a key. And maybe we can find some breakthrough technologies that can give us a different view and can give us different solutions. There are a lot of things that we have to do. If you transport ammonia, we have to crack down hydrogen. Before, if you want to use seawater in the electrolyzers, we need to remove the membranes because it's so delicate for that. This is a breakthrough technology, because if we are going to Africa, we cannot use sweet water to do hydrogen. We need to have seawater. So technology is really at the heart of energy transition in any kind of decarbonization, not only hydrogen. So R&D, innovation, and again, to create ecosystem, because from one, let me say, consumer to another consumer of energy, you can make it a transfer of a technology. You can make best practice, and you can learn from our activities. Fuel cell has been made for the space activities, okay? And now we are using to produce energy. So we need, let me say, to create this perfect ecosystem just to drive a change.
Thank you. Aikaterini.
From us, we start from a vision. We are now trying to go in action. And the only thing I can tell for our project is that we are trying to do the impossible possible in Greece, in Crete. And we would like to have your help as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Sorry. First of all, good luck to the Greenfield project. It's always a big challenge, like for any industry or for any project. I'd like to thank all of you. I have learned a lot preparing for this panel and also listening to all of you. It's a very interesting sector that I personally haven't touched from a business perspective. I hope next year when we sit here again, if we're invited, we'll have progress. We'll have policy making progress and tangible progress, because I think that's the. I saw your post that is it your 10th? No, year at Davos.
No, my first one was 2000.
Okay.
But I haven't come the whole time.
Okay.
This is my 11th.
And I hope you see that progress. And I think sometimes we don't see it on a year by year basis because it's too far reaching. But I hope we will have the progress, and I hope the policymakers will take the messages and hear them loud and clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.